To begin today, I'm going to do some introductions here. Welcome everyone to our webinar. We have Phil Gulley, who is our Chief Strategy Officer at CoFactr and also one of the co-founders. We have Matt Haber, who is the CEO and also the co-founder. And then we have Shane Sheffield, who is our VP of Assembly at Advanced Assembly, which is a division of Summit Interconnect. And then I am Allison Herrera. I'm an account manager for Summit Interconnect. So we're going to be talking today about the component struggles that we're all facing in the current market. It is something that every customer is dealing with. And we have some solutions today that we want to share with you that will be helpful for your company to be able to apply these to your company, your particular struggles. And hopefully we can help you find some solutions that will work for you. So we have Phil, who's going to begin the presentation today. And I just want to remind you that as you are watching the presentation, this is interactive. So there's a chat where you can send in questions. And as the questions come in, we can stop and answer those questions. So we will go ahead and get started now.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Allison. And obviously, thank you, Advance, and thank you, Summit, for sort of holding court today and allowing us to be a part of this. We're definitely thrilled to be collaborating with you and to be here and sort of chatting about some of these things that I know that are top of mind for us all the time at CoFactr, and are definitely things that we're really proud to sort of help and support in the endeavors for our mutual customers. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is a presentation trying to be objective. So obviously Advance has got incredible facilities and a ton of infrastructure to support these processes. CoFactr, we focus on a lot of these challenges as well. And this is sort of trying to take us out of it and just give some sort of what's the state of the union and what are some things that we can do to sort of support the processes when it comes to getting components in the right place at the right time. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. All right, and this is just a quick sort of layout of how to manufacture on schedule. So managing and sourcing components to secure your timeline. So quick overview, we're gonna talk about the challenges. So state of the supply chain, procurement, and manufacturing. What are some of the challenges that we see with consigned materials coming through our facility? Pre-buying and holding stock as an OEM, just some maybe keep top of mind. Some solutions on some of these challenges that I'm going to talk about, and then just sort of drop what is CoFactr? Who am I, and why am I talking to you? Why are we here? And then we'll get into some stories about customers that we're supporting mutually as sort of entities sort of together to ease some of these challenges. So the current component situation. So last few years are super rough. Everybody's really aware of that. Things are definitely easing up in a lot of ways, but the shortages of the past are not quite over. If you look on the right, you're going to see some headlines. These are contemporary headlines. This is right here, right now stuff. When we look at TI, when we look at Xilinx chips, there are still a lot of components that are in short supply, especially in those high compliance industries that I know that we serve a lot of. So you still need to strategically pre-buy some of your components. So purchasing at the time of manufacturing, right? Like in an ideal world, we sort of only make those buys right before they go on the line. But the reality is that a lot of the BOMs that we're seeing still have, maybe a component up to maybe 10% of those components not immediately available. And when we say not immediately available, what do we mean by that? And that just means that there's some sort of shortage condition. So might need to go out through brokers, sort of, get away from sort of tier one or authorized channels. And that can lead to something that feels like a needle in a haystack. And we're going to see some increase in pricing there. And that's sort of 2 to 10 times pricing. It can go a lot higher than that, but I'm trying to be conservative here. And then outside of those broker markets, we have factory lead time. Now that can be 2 weeks, it can be 3 weeks, it can be 52 weeks, it can be longer than that. We're seeing certain component categories where you're looking at sometimes 70 weeks or longer, which can be really challenging because that's going to obviously push back your manufacturing date. And then what about limited stock available and no factory lead times reported? That's a scary place to be in, especially for some of those more mature components that might have been end of life already. And that just means, look, we're going to do the best we can, but you might be looking at a partially delivered order. So even though you have that sort of planning at 1,200 units, we might be looking at, a reality that's a little bit shorter than that. And let's talk about when we receive materials. And at CoFactr, we handle a lot of materials for our customers. We get a lot of boxes of stuff and sort of clean it up. And some of the challenges that we see is physical damaging to the actual component packaging. And this might not be something top of mind, but that tape can sort of splay apart or a tray can get damaged. And what this means is that a pick and place machine is not going to have the ability to just sort of take that and easily put it on a board. And that can lead to slowdowns. It can lead to damaged materials, right? Something pops out of the packaging, gets jarred around, right? That's no bueno. And then attrition not being considered. So you might say, we're making 200 units. We got this critical chip. We got 200 of them. The reality is that's not enough really for a lot of these pick and place processes. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So pre-buying and holding stock as an OEM. So what are the things that we see that can kind of slow the process here? So those EE teams often have stock, right, in their own facilities, on their own desks. You've got inventoried stock sort of on premise, right? And so you might have sort of stored away in your general inventory a lot of materials, or you might be using a third-party logistics provider for these. And some of the things that we see are sometimes it can take a little bit of time, right? So if you're working with a 3PL, it might take a day, 2 days, 3 days to sort of get accurate stock in hand, right? To really understand what's going on and then get that shipped out. Sometimes those numbers can be misreported, right? Electronic components, the reality is that teams might not be specialized. You might not have the equipment in-house, X-ray parts counters, et cetera, to really get an exact report on how many components you have. And that can lead to challenges in planning for manufacturing. And then MPN mismatches. And this is something that I know really bugs a lot of our customers, is that you can have a lot of different names for the same parts, right? And a dash is one thing, or an extra zero, or maybe a T or an R at the end of that MPN, but it gets pretty wild. And when you've sort of strategically procured and stored materials, you're looking at something like 39-00-0038. Now, those dashes can get moved around. Sometimes you get some wild mix-ups there, like 5556T. That is an MPN alt. That is also known as for 39-00-0038. And that's not the easiest stuff to track in sort of a standard inventory management system. So pre-buying the wrong material. So often components are procured that are critical, but not in shortage conditions. And this is something that we see sort of too often, I would say, is that you've got those really critical parts that teams have absolutely thought ahead on, and they have stockpiled those. But then you get these unexpected problem categories like MOSFETs or LEDs, inductors, connectors, these things that feel like they should be available. But then when you go to manufacture, they're actually in shortage condition. And obviously, if you don't have a part, you don't have a product. And so these are some sort of issues that we face. And now how do we solve these problems, right? So obviously considering alts early in the design, especially for high compliance. Work with solutions engineers, original component manufacturers, or distributors to find as many fit, form, and function alts as possible. Another interesting approach that we've seen is just creating alternate designs to facilitate package types. So again, whether you got those gull wings or sort of a different package type, you might want to consider just, can we get those different designs ready to go so that if we have to pivot,
or multiple footprints in the same design is another one that we see folks have a lot of success with. I know the AA folks on passives have done some work like designing different footprints that are flexible to different sizes, but you can do that with all sorts of components, and that if the board design can allow it, can be really useful.
Yeah, and that's an excellent, another sort of webinar call out is that there is a really excellent webinar that Advanced put together on some really interesting footprint work. Definitely a fave over here at CoFactr. And so don't stop at active components, right? Because we've seen a lot of issues also with these passives, right? And I don't know, Matt, I know that you saw a challenging passive pretty recently. I don't know if you want to.
One of our mutual customers between CoFactr and AA had a challenge recently with a precision resistor, right? So resistors seem like a thing that you should just be able to get, right? 0603 resistor, super standard component, but there were some really specific qualities to this one that were necessary for their design. And when this customer started planning their production run, this part was fairly readily available from some authorized distributors. By the time they went to actually go procure it, it was completely stocked out, and it had like an 80 or 90 week lead time, something like that, from the factory. And it was actually not turned out an easy part to find an alt for. And so that's really holding up their production. It's kind of a big deal. And so obviously that's the kind of thing where if you'd either designed with a little more flexibility around alt or been able to be a little more proactive about identifying, this seems like it should be an easy component, but in fact, that it actually sort of presents some supply chain risk there and get ahead of those issues.
Yep. So rack up those jelly beans. All right, and then so review supply chain conditions while still in that design or NPI phase, right? And this is, present company excluded, sort of ignoring what we offer. There's risk mitigation data tools like Silicon Expert. They do a great job, really, like especially with that sort of side-by-side comparison. Electronic search engines, Octopart, the Nexar Octopart family, we're close with them. They definitely have some great data tools as well on top of that sort of fundamental Octopart offering. And then consultants and other enterprise solutions, right? Accurus, sort of they're a great tool, sort of a spinoff of or evolution of IHS Market. Really interesting data. So, just make sure that you're aware of what is available in the world and that you're keeping yourself sort of abreast of the best possible supply chain data, as well as just getting ahead of those purchases. And then, and again, this is obviously Advanced Assembly has a massive facility with more infrastructure than you'd ever believe on making sure the materials are handled very safely. We've been to their space, and it is a breathtakingly clean and respectable location, and we are very, very proud of our facility. Now, when you're thinking about how are these materials handled before they arrive at a facility like Advanced Assembly, you have to manage those materials correctly, and that can be humidity-controlled cabinets, ESD flooring, grounding equipment, maybe just a separate facility specifically for electronics. Training your team, right? If you have an inventory team and they're sort of handling those materials on ESD, IPC, ISO standards, that's going to be important. You don't want to have an event that might do some damage to those materials. Or you might want to consider an external lab or an internal inspection process for materials, especially if they're coming off of the broker market. And then consider the attrition that I mentioned before. It's really, really important, right? Enough to make 500 PCBAs is not necessarily enough to make 500 PCBAs. And the attrition can vary really dramatically from component package to component package. So those teeny tiny parts, you might only be making 10 of a board, but you might need a couple hundred of those parts just to make sure that we're good when it comes to getting everything on the line. Or you might end up having to hand place those components, and it might slow down your process there. And then price plays a giant role as well, right? So balancing the value of the parts with the realities of manufacturing. This is a conversation that you might want to have with a partner early on like, let's talk about the realities of the materials and how they're going to go on those boards.
Definitely a talk to your CM situation, right? Every contract manufacturer knows what kind of equipment they're running, what the attrition requirements of that equipment's going to be, and they're going to be able to tell you what you need. And you have to talk to them up front, because it's sort of no use if you've stockpiled parts, but you didn't stockpile enough of them and to deal with the realities of manufacturing.
Definitely. And then the final, right, the one that is most precious and most valuable, which is time. If you can sort of get ahead of things, always a good option to do so. It can take weeks to secure a BOM, right? Like, even if those parts are readily available, even if we've seen plenty of times where a part has to be shipped from a warehouse that is in Europe that you maybe didn't realize was in Europe, and they only ship a couple times a week, and now they only ship every 4 days. And so now you've got international travel plus 4 days of buffer, and you've just added, 7 or 11 days to just getting those materials in hand. And that can be with parts that are available, that you can see that stock right now. Distributor stock, sometimes it's misrepresented. A+ distributors still now and then, right? You take for granted there's 3,000 of those on the shelf. Sometimes it's not actually the case. That can be really challenging, especially when you're right on the edge there. And then the wrong materials can be sent. So even the best distributors sometimes send the wrong component. And this is like, you think about a resistor, they've got incredible organizational structures, but sometimes the those little stripes are not the right color, and you gotta deal with that, and that can add a couple days right there. Or the wrong quantity of components, right? You order 200 and 100 show up. It happens. We do a ton of sort of material checking in our facility, and it is a bummer, right? When you sort of realize, oh, we need to reorder some of those, call up the distributor, get those materials sort of sorted out. And then compliance and traceability. This is huge, right? So God forbid there is an issue in the future, or you just need to have that traceability back to the country of origin, the sort of original component manufacturer, right? So you really got to track those splits, those splices, those reels of material, make sure that you can get back to that. What is the original purchase? Who was that first distributor? Who was that OCM? What is that COO, especially in high compliance? Record, organize, store that documentation, and that includes REACH and RoHS compliance, right? That can get really, really important, especially in aerospace, anything that's going into sort of critical, medical environments, space environments, right? That's really important stuff. So make sure you keep ahead of that. And then why am I talking? Who are Matt and I? Why are we here? So we're fundamentally we're an electronic 3PL for innovative manufacturers. And we sort of say 3PL because we do a lot of physical management of materials for our customers, for AA customers. We collaborate on this. And really that sort of first step of like we have our hands on the stuff, but we view logistics and sort of inventory as supported by procurement, right? And so we are procurement, we're inventory, and we are logistics all sort of combined. So enter a BOM into our system, create an optimized procurement strategy. We will work as a purchasing office. That's a single PO across all your distributors, or using your own APIs to sort of automate that purchasing process. We physically receive, we check materials, that's either anti-counterfeit inspections, X-ray parts count, et cetera. Store those materials and then kit those out. And we do this all, of course, hyper vigilant about moisture sensitivity and to make sure that we're not having any ESD events. Really incredible facility over here in New York. Come check it out if you want. And then we have a great software interface. So all your traceability, all your compliance documentation in one place, real-time auditable data. We're really proud of it. Obviously, would love to share it with anyone that we haven't had a chance to talk to. And with that, that's sort of that's as objective as I think I can be without, without starting to breach that zone. So I think it's time to talk about advanced assembly and CoFactr and some of the problems that we've solved together for our customers.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a couple of just stories from the last couple of years working on customer projects. And obviously during the pandemic, it was totally chaotic with components, trying to find the right components that we expected to be available that were no longer available. And now we're kind of coming out of that, but a lot of those problems still haven't been totally solved. And we're still dealing with issues where we're not able to find those critical components that we thought by now those supply chain issues would be solved. So I think, one specific example just from last week was a commercial product, and it was our first time working with this customer, and they had one of their a tech in their company order parts for them. And so when they asked them to order the BOM, they said, just order 10% extra components on everything. So we received in the parts. It was a really quick turn. We needed to do 1-day fab, 2-day assembly. During the time when we received the components, we realized, hey, you only sent 10%, but these are tiny components. We need way more. And so this 3-day turn ended up turning into a 5 or 6-day turn because we had to hold the line, because obviously we're not going to place these tiny components by hand. And that really put a wrench in the timeline of the project, because they expected a 3-day turn, and it wasn't, our fault, but also the customer just wasn't aware, and he's never loaded an SMT machine to know that, that machine is going to eat up the majority of those components. So these kind of attrition issues that we run into is just one issue that we see every single, almost, I would say every day in this industry, because each shop has their own attrition models, like you said, and it's important to get that information in front of you. But also on top of that, there's been situations where we have these critical components, not just, you know, these tiny parts that are worth a few dollars, but critical components that we need for the build that we can't get anywhere. And if we're going to have to go to get it from a broker, we're paying, you know, 100x sometimes the cost. During the pandemic, we're paying crazy prices for these components. And then you've got to bring them in from offshore. There were times that we brought them in and they were from reputable brokers, but we come to find out that they're not original parts, because even though they've done their checks, we've had times where we bring them in and we discover there's an issue with this component. So one thing kind of I want to ask, as working on the advanced assembly side for our customers, how can CoFactr mitigate those risks? How can, you know, people use CoFactr as a solution to help with their CM? Because obviously they can come to us at advanced assembly, we can buy the components for the BOM, but where does CoFactr fit in this process?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to timing, right? So CoFactr customers typically are starting to use our software way at the beginning of the design phase. And obviously, you know, contract manufacturers like AA are super friendly and happy to answer questions, but realistically, people aren't going to send their CM every little tweak to the BOM they make all through their design process long before it's locked, right? Like that just isn't practical typically. But some of these kinds of supply chain problems have to be mitigated really early on at that step, right? And so one of the things is the CoFactr makes it super convenient to start looking at what are the risk factors in my BOM, what parts are causing problems, let me get ahead of buying them. And then when I am buying them, am I buying the right amount? Are they being stored in a suitable way? Are they being inspected day one, right? Obviously, again, advanced assembly and the brokers you guys work with have plenty of capabilities to do inspections, but the parts have to get to you before that can happen. You can't magically inspect them, you know, 3 months earlier before they're ever in your hands. And so it's all about trying to make sure we head these issues off day one. Attrition, same thing, right? CoFactr software will pull in the attrition requirements of different contract manufacturers and automatically calculate that. And so people don't have to guess. They don't have to call, you know, you, Allison, up and say, hey, you know, for each line in my 100-line BOM, how much attrition do I need? The software is just going to know that and make sure that they buy the correct quantity, you know, day one without having any sort of like domain expertise on the customer side.
Great. So Shane, do you have, can you tell us some examples of working with CoFactr for a customer that would help people understand how the two work together in tandem?
Sure. And I'll preface by saying, you know, in advanced assembly, we build approximately 400 designs, unique designs each month. And we see it all. And I can tell you that we've seen everything that Phil just mentioned. We see it, and we saw it 3 years ago, 2 years ago. We still see it today. We still see all the issues that he was mentioning. So I have two examples that I'll share with you guys. We had an aerospace company, local aerospace company, and they were going to release about a dozen projects all at once. And their issue was that they were having difficulty assigning staff to procure all these parts that they needed. And so they reached out to us and asked us if we had a solution. Our solution was simply, you know, let's reach out to CoFactr, let's explain the situation and see where we can take it from there. So the first step was that the customer provided us the parts that they did, that they were able to acquire. And so we inventoried, with the help of CoFactr, we created kits for all of their jobs, and we inventoried what we received. That left us, you know, with the task of finding all of the other parts. We were able to, within a matter of days, do what our customer had spent weeks attempting to do. And it was really nice there. So the CoFactr creates kits for each of the jobs that we have. Here's the parts go into the kits. And now we've got full kits that are able to be released to us with overage. They're barcoded, and then they come to us ready to build. Of those dozen or so jobs, you know, I want to say first 4 or 5 of those were released immediately and sent off assembly. We were able to build them and take care of the customer. And you know, now right, we're just in that waiting pattern of some longer lead time parts that the customer didn't identify early in the process. And so we found those. Some of those we were able to shorten using CoFactr software, they were able to shorten some of those turn times and lead times. But yeah, it worked really well for that particular customer. It provided a service that they couldn't do themselves. And so that was one example. The second example is more of a commercial customer, and they have about nine jobs that they are releasing. Now they were a little more proactive, like Phil recommended. What they did for us is they sent us a master BOM for all of their projects. I think that we were able to source their entire BOM through CoFactr. I want to say 4 hours. It might have been 8 hours, but we sourced all the parts for the customer in a matter of hours. So in this case, in this example, the customer had BOMs were 95, 96% complete, but their Gerber files were still, the Gerber files still being worked on today. This was the perfect example because in this case, the customer knew he had long lead time parts. He knew he had some hard to find parts, but he passed it over to us knowing that we have a partnership with CoFactr. We get in touch with CoFactr, we source everything, and we're able to provide now to the customer his lead times to know when the last of those parts will come in. What's really neat about this process is they have made a few changes. They simply send the change over. We make sure that CoFactr has that. They pull the part that we're not going to need now and replace that with the new part. So where we stand with this customer now is they have kits that are ready. They have inventory that is visible to them so they can see the parts they have. If they ever just wanted to contact us and pull some of those parts to use on other projects that they have in-house right now or that might be released earlier, they're free to do that. But at the end of the day, what we're expecting is their Gerber files to be ready in the next few weeks. We'll finish the assembly quotes and send it over to the customer. Well, we know now that CoFactr can immediately begin releasing kits per job with overage that come in barcoded to us. And then they hit the floor and then they take off. So what we've been able to do in this example is really set the customer up for success. Our customer is able to tell their end customer exactly what that turn time is going to look like, with the assurance that the parts not only are available, but we've got them, we've inventoried them, and they're in a safe environment until they're ready to release them. In this example, the customer actually is going to have some first articles too. And what's really neat about that, instead of us having a whole kit that we have to break out here, then we can simply reach out to CoFactr and tell them we have the first article of, let's just throw out a number 5 or 10 pieces. And they're going to send us a kit only for those 5 or 10 pieces. We'll build the first article and the remaining parts stay in a safe environment that's protected for the customer. And so I'll tell you, we've offered this to a lot of customers. A lot of customers didn't know it even existed. And it's really been helpful in that way of helping the customer manage their expectations and not place an order and then find out that parts are, I think some of these were about 90-day lead times, but now they can place their part and they know, or excuse me, place their order, and it's very visible when we're waiting on those last few parts. So that's just 2 examples. We could go on and on, but I thought those were probably the 2 most meaningful that I would like to share.
So I have a hypothetical question for CoFactr. If I'm an engineer, I have maybe 5 designs on my team, and I only want to buy 10 different line items of critical components for these boards. Can I just buy parts for, 5 boards, only, maybe 100 units each? Is that a customer that would work for CoFactr, or do I need to be a big company that's ordering hundreds of BOM and line items in large quantities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We work with customers that range from, a startup where it's just the 2 founders and that's it, and they're ordering the parts they need to make their first initial prototypes, all the way up to some of the kinds of folks you guys are talking about where they're ordering millions and millions of dollars a year across, dozens of BOMs and, thousands of different unique SKUs. So total range there. And I think what's great about having kind of a software-driven approach to doing what we're doing is that it allows us to provide that sort of enterprise grade sophistication, but at a really approachable, friendly package for smaller companies, and then they can grow with it, right? So we have customers who started using CoFactr in that exact kind of use case, a couple products, maybe, you know, a few dozen parts across them. They were buying their first few parts, and now they're doing 10,000 units a quarter and you know, manufacturing globally and working with multiple contract manufacturers, and that's a really seamless process for them. And so we're always happy. There's really no one is sort of too small. And I think that example you're describing also of saying like, hey, I'm still in the design phase. It's still a small team, but let me get out ahead of these sort of few critical parts. That's great. We're very happy for people to like start doing that, because that's always a good sign that people are actually kind of paying attention to their supply chain considerations and being proactive.
Yeah, and I would add on to that. I mean, a thing that a lot of our customers use us for is just figuring out what those 10 are, right? Because sometimes it's not the ones you expect. And I think that there's a from the hip attitude or feeling that you go, well, what's the most expensive one? What's the most critical one in the design? What's the first one that I placed? You know, and the reality is that it might be something totally unexpected. And that's what a lot of our customers use us for, is just sort of look at your bill of materials inside of CoFactr and go, oh, there's 3 parts I need to worry about. Those are the 3 I'm going to buy today. And they're going to be waiting for me when it's time to go to manufacturing. And then like a great partner like Advanced Assembly sort of with us can boom, sort of pull everything together at the last minute. It's that just in time versus just in case thing. And figuring out what the just in case is really a solid use of how our customers are using CoFactr in the earlier stages of design.
I think just to kind of wrap everything up, if, you know, we work together in tandem, Advanced Assembly along with CoFactr, to meet these critical component issues that we're facing. So if you have any specific questions related to CoFactr or Advanced Assembly, we can set up personal Zoom calls with you to kind of discuss your specific needs and requirements for your projects. And we'd be happy to get you a solution that works for you, that will help you to get these parts in advance, to make sure that you have them when you're ready to build. Because a lot of people, I've noticed, they wait till the very end to, you know, they're pushing up against their timeline, and they're putting that pressure on the manufacturer to help them meet that quick delivery. But if they don't have these things set in place from early on, then it's just a recipe for disaster. So as much as we can eliminate any kind of issue coming up in the manufacturing process, we want to do that, take care of that early. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you all for joining today, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.